This episode of Youth Culture Matters is sponsored in part by Judson College. As a parent and now a grandparent myself, I have lived through the ups, downs, stresses, strains, opportunities, and joys that come with raising kids in today's world. Recently, the U.S. Surgeon General issued an advisory regarding the troubling state of the mental health and well-being of parents. Because youth workers are strategically positioned to come alongside, encourage, and minister to parents in today's world, we need to pay attention to this advisory and look for ways to proactively minister to the parents in our churches and communities. Stick with us for my roundtable conversation with youth workers about the advisory and our response on this episode of Youth Culture Matters.
From the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding, this is Youth Culture Matters. If you're a parent, youth worker, educator, counselor, grandparent, or anyone else who cares about kids, we're glad you've joined us for this practical, informative, and hope-filled podcast. This is a place where together we talk and think Christianly about the rapidly changing world of today's children, teens, and young adults.
Well, welcome everybody to another episode of Youth Culture Matters. I'm Walt Mueller here at the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding, and today we've got a lineup here. I love doing this with my youth worker friends, folks who are actually CPYU research fellows. We bring them in from time to time for these roundtable conversations, and I find them extremely helpful for me, and I truly believe they'll be really helpful for you because it's fun to talk about. Well, it's not always fun, but it's healthy and helpful, I believe, to talk about things that are happening in the culture as things come up and try to process them from a Christian perspective and think about together, how do we answer this as followers of Jesus Christ through our ministries, whether that's in a church or a Christian school or, no matter where that is. So today we're going to have a conversation about another Surgeon General's advisory that has come out here in the last month or so in the U.S. on mental health and the well-being of parents. Typically when a Surgeon General's advisory comes out, it's about some big, physical disease. There was one recently and we had a conversation about it, about social media and the role that plays in forming or deforming or shaping or misshaping our kids. But this one's really interesting because it's about parents, and I think it hits on an issue that we're all seeing, and I believe as well we're all feeling. So Chris Wagner's here in the studio as he always is, and then Carrie Trumfio's joining us from the beautiful North Shore of Boston, where as I think about it and say it, Carrie, the leaves are probably at peak right now. Is that right?
It's beautiful here.
Yeah. Rub
Lots
it in.
of colors.
Yeah, so it's nice up there. And then Katie Schneider's here. Katie's out more towards the Midwest. Katie, exactly where are you? Tell everyone where you are.
I am in Dousman, Wisconsin, which is about 45 minutes west of Milwaukee, so like southeastern Wisconsin.
Yeah, and as we record this, you and I were back and forth, of course, because of the baseball playoffs. You're a Brewers fan. So we have a the day we're recording this, I don't know what's going to happen with the series between the Phillies, my beloved Phillies, and the Mets, but I've got a hunch that Katie and I are going to have a mutual hatred for the New York Mets. So, Katie, thanks for hopping on. And then Tim McAlpine's here joining us from the Great White North. I don't even know if you know what baseball is, Tim, but you're so into hockey. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I know baseball has far too many games, but it fills the airwaves while I'm waiting for hockey to start in the offseason.
I hear that a lot. And by the way, as we record this, I think last night was opening night for the NHL season. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Did your Flames play?
No, they play tonight.
Okay. All right. So you're worked up, and it's probably a good day to talk about stress. So here's what I want to start with before we jump into the Surgeon General's report. We all get worked up from time to time over different things, and I thought it'd be fun and enlightening to maybe talk about some of the things in our lives, each of us, that we allow ourselves to get stressed out about. Needless stress. In fact, sometimes I'll just speak for myself. When we're in the midst of it, you're going, this is so stupid that I am stressed out over this. So I'm just curious what those things might be. So I don't know if I need to call on people. I did give you a heads up on this, but all right, let's go ladies first. Carrie, I'm picking on you. What is it in your life that, and we're all parents here. Everybody who's on this podcast today is a parent. We're not going to talk specifically about parenting yet, perhaps, but what is it that gets you a little bit riled up and stressful?
Laundry at my house is what stresses me out the most, because at our house, it is a days-long process, because you have to, you wash it and then you dry it, but then you have to fold it and then put it away. It takes days and days. And with 2 young kids, it never stops. So when I read that this morning, that's
what you thought of. Yeah. Now, just out of curiosity, do you have an electric washing machine, or do you use like a washboard and a big tin bucket?
Definitely just outside scrubbing.
Oh, okay. Down at the river? Down at the river. Down at the river. Yeah. Okay. And I think about that. I what a convenience these machines are, this technology that we have, and how in the olden days, like you said, days at a time. So, yeah, we might have to get an advisor to help you with that, how to streamline that process. But I get it. Laundry, cleaning, things like that. Yeah. Let's go to Katie.
The first thing that came to mind, and I don't know exactly how to phrase this, but I have a really bad habit of having, like, if I have somewhere I need to be, or my family has an obligation that we need to get to, like, I have in my brain like a schedule of things that needs to happen before we can get to that thing. I don't often verbalize what's in my head, and then I get stressed out, mainly at my husband, when he doesn't cater to the schedule that I didn't tell him about.
Yes, I get that. And what really amplifies that or ramps that up is that as married people, we always think that the other person needs to be a mind reader.
Right.
Yeah.
At this point, he should just know what is in my brain and be able to tell me. And when things don't go according to plan, even though I didn't verbalize that plan, I still get upset and stressed out.
Yeah.
For one reason or another.
Yeah. We've been married 42, going on 43 years, and I'm just giving you a little heads up. That mind reading thing is still a struggle. Yeah. Hey, let me go to Chris in the studio here, because
Sure. I'll.
This is, you probably have a notebook.
I get worked up on all kinds of stuff, right? Word. You know me, but lawn care, like having to think through, like, I need to mow the lawn because it's been raining a lot, but then you're looking at the weather, you're juggling, am I going to be able to fit it in this window? Do I have to run kids to activities on this evening, and that's the only night that's not going to rain? And like juggling when I'm going to try to fit in mowing the lawn, taking care of the lawn. I get way overstressed about that, and I think it's stupid.
You just gave me what I think mine is, so I'll come back to that after.
Well, we live in the same neighborhood for our audience.
Yeah.
You mow your lawn like 3 times as many times as I do.
Yeah.
I don't know if it stresses you out or not, but you are a bit obsessed about it.
Yeah, we're going to come back to that.
Okay.
Let me gather my thoughts on that. But Tim, what about you? You're a Canadian. You're just so relaxed about everything.
That's right. No, I find so we have a parking pad in the back that backs onto an alley, and then we have street parking in the front. We don't have a garage in the front, attached garage. And so parking stresses me out. So I will actually, we have a neighbor in the back alley who parks in the alley, which is against the bylaws, and you're not allowed to. And I really want to call bylaw, but haven't, because it's awkward to pull out. But then in the front, like I will load us up into our car that's parked in the back instead of taking the van at certain times of day, because I feel like if we leave and the van's gone, then someone will take our parking spot in front of our house. So I will make my family uncomfortable cramming into our car when we have this wonderful blessing of a van, so that we can keep the parking spot in front of our house.
You probably, Carrie could help you with this, because in New England, where the parking's tight, if someone vacates their space where it's all street parking, isn't this true, Carrie? People they'll put a couch out there or, something in the street to hold that space. I mean, something, and it's beyond like reasonable what they put out there. I don't.
Yeah, you just like go inside, find a large object, and
Yes.
get it out there.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Like, yeah, if your grandmother lives with you, put a chair out there, sit her in there, have her guard. Yeah. I remember that from living up there in Salem because our parking was on the street. And, man, when it snows and it's a one-way street and it's narrow, yeah, you have that. So I think, I was going to say just my fandom. That stresses me out. My Philadelphia teams, and it's always my whole life. It's just been, I expect the worst. I kind of think like everybody feels that way, no matter where they're from. But you brought up the lawn, Chris, and I'm at a point right now. So that's the one thing. I feel like my lawn is the one thing in my life I have control over. Like there's order to it, and I can do a job and it's finished. But we've had this crazy weather and my lawn was doing great. And then I came back from Canada and something's going on there that's very distressing. Is that happening on your lawn too?
Oh yeah.
Those browns? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And of course that the stress, like when you travel a lot, so you have to figure in when am I going to do it in between travel stints and stuff. So that would add up. That would bump up the stress level.
Yeah.
I get that.
Yeah. I think this question just exposed an idol in my life. I need to deal with this. Yeah. I think, well, we all have these things, and that's what we're going to talk about, stress. But I want to switch the conversation now and ask you all again, because we're all parents. As your kids, and most of your kids are younger, obviously, mine are grown. I'll think about my grandkids. As your kids go through life now, and you are in the present, but you also look ahead to the future, what kinds of things concern you and, let's say, might lead you to cross over into stress and anxiety? And, I'm thinking here about a lot of the cultural stuff that happens as well. So let me circle back to Carrie on that.
I would say technology is a big one in our house that I worry about. Just watching. So I have a 5-year-old and an almost 2-year-old. And just watching my 5-year-old with how knowledgeable she is and how naturally it comes to her to use this. She doesn't know life without it. So just as she gets older, putting some wise guidelines up and about time and activity, what's actually done on those things, that is a stressor for me. And then just on a kind of larger scale picture as a youth worker, where for so many of us, our jobs are not like 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. I really get stressed or anxious about the time that we have together. I'm out at least one night a week. So I miss bedtime. And then you have summers where we're gone for a week on a mission trip, and there's a music conference or music festival that we take kids to for a long weekend. And we're really blessed to have a lot of family nearby that watch them, and they love that. They can adjust really easily to being away from us. But time together is something just in this line of work that I stress about.
Yeah. And I think that's definitely a legitimate concern, that we balance that. And so I think if we become uneasy, that can be really helpful and have other people help us with that. By the way, spouses are great for helping us manage that. So for those who are in ministry who are married, that's a big deal. Katie, what about you?
I would say one of the biggest ones for me right now, Carrie touched on technology, and that's obviously a big one. But one of the other ones that I've been thinking a lot about lately, and my daughter's she's almost 20 months now, is school. Where we want to eventually send her for school, whether we go public school, whether we do private school. I don't think homeschooling's on the table right now for a variety of different reasons, but trying to make a wise choice so that she, can learn and grow and all of those things we want her to do, but also protect her from certain things. We know we can't protect her from everything forever, but there are certain things that kids are being exposed to at younger and younger ages, even in private schools, that we as her parents want to be the first voice speaking to her about some of those things. So trying to think about, a few years from now, what schooling might look like. That's definitely been a big one for me.
Yeah. Chris.
Yeah, talk about season of life, right? You're wondering about school. I'm also, my stressor currently is school, but I have a high school senior, so mine's college application. We're in peak application season, so thinking through college applications, acceptance, the finances that come with that, worrying about is he ready, socially, emotionally. Not so much worried with this one academically, but are they ready for college? Are they ready to step out on their own? Have I done my job as a parent to send them successfully off to college and all those kinds of things?
Well, you got one big box to check yet, and that's that driver's license thing. Is that stressing you at all?
Actually, that doesn't stress me too much.
Okay, all right. Yeah, it's just stressing everybody else in the
But
neighborhood.
yeah, everyone who sees him on the road.
Coming on the yeah.
Comparatively, that's in my life, that's a much smaller stress. But yeah.
What about you, Tim?
Yeah, I think for me, it's the irrational fear that I'm gonna cause some sort of trauma in my kids' lives that I'm not aware of in my attempts to parent and provide boundaries. And I think I've got a 13, 12, and 3-year-old, and both my daughters are beautiful, but and we have stricter rules up here when it comes to owning guns, etc. So
I was just thinking that.
Yeah. But no, I think it's anytime that we kind of put in a boundary or say no, and there's an emotional reaction, there's this fear of like, oh man, I've ruined my kid. Like, I don't know, I mean, those cultural pressures of now every parent's caused so much trauma in every kid's lives that we're bound, like it's just going to happen. And so I'm constantly, I think not constantly, but there's just times where I leave a conversation and go, oh shoot, she's probably going to talk to a counselor about that one day.
Yeah. I for me, it's just as we study culture, how are my grandkids going to navigate this? And, even my own kids, how do you navigate this? Because it seems from one generation to another, you guys are all probably feeling this with your parents. Parenting sort of shifts and it changes a little bit. And, I remember that with my parents and my grandparents, like, oh, kids today, or the way kids, and I just... I pray diligently for my grandkids that they would just be able to be wise, be discerning, that the Lord would have his hand on them. I pray that prayer about before, behind, side by side, above, below. God, go with them. And, But, and this is the thing. So let's shift here and start to look, before we take a break, a little bit at this, this Surgeon General's advisory that, we have, I think, two things. One, as Christians, we need to have a different perspective on anxiety and stress. And certainly this is where youth workers and churches can come in and come alongside parents and give a perspective on that. Jesus is our burden bearer. But the other part of that is, and even as I heard you talk, some of the concerns you have are about putting up borders and boundaries on things where perhaps in the larger scheme of parenting across our culture, people aren't thinking the way you all are. Like they're jumping in and going, how can I not let my kid get behind with social media and technology, rather than how can I put borders and boundaries up, and so they indulge their kids in this, athletics. So I'm sure we'll get to that, the same thing. So the Surgeon General, and let me read this. This always, whenever I read a Surgeon General's advisory, this opening paragraph, It says this, and when the government speaks up on this, it's a big deal. And keep in mind, there's some data in here, and typically the government won't speak out a whole lot till they have at least some data in hand, and it's bad enough that they're speaking up about it in spite of the fact that there's still much to be learned. So they're waving a flag saying, "Hey, wake up, everybody." So here it is. It says, a Surgeon General's advisory is a public statement that calls the American people's attention to an urgent public health issue and provides recommendations for how it should be addressed. Advisories are reserved for significant public health challenges that require the nation's immediate awareness and action. So what is this advisory about? This advisory calls attention to the importance of parental stress, mental health, and well-being, stressors unique to parenting, and the bidirectional relationship between parental mental health and child outcomes. So, our nature and nurture, people talk about that, but our environment does shape or misshape us. So let's just talk first about the forward to this, which was actually 2 pages long. And Vivek Murthy is our Surgeon General. I was really struck when I read this, just about how serious this is and the perspective from which he comes, which in so many ways is laudable. So I'm going to throw this out. What jumped out at you folks from his forward as he sets the table here for what's to follow?
I think for me, I think just the acknowledgement of the significance of parenting. The one sentence reads, "The work of parenting is essential not only for the health of children, but also for the health of society." And I think that's a heavy statement. I think it's a true statement. I think it aligns with a lot of my personal convictions, and I think even what Scripture would teach as far as the importance of a family and the way it's structured. But I was actually surprised by that. I didn't anticipate in our current cultural climate for them to put such significance on the parents in particular, just the way things seem to play out.
When I read it, in that same sentence, I have that underlined here. There's a sense that the tide is turning on our understanding of family and the implications of what I grew up in, culturally speaking, not necessarily in my own. It wasn't in my own home, obviously, but the sexual revolution, the rise of selfishness, individualism, self-sovereignty. Hey, it's all about me, which has led to a decline in marriage. I remember with growing up in the 60s and the 70s, neighborhood kids who never saw their dads because they were so immersed in work. And then, people start, well, okay, all right. And then women moving into the workforce. And to me, that's not, an issue. The problem is when our selfishness, male or female, moves us into situations where we're spending more time pursuing things that we think we need to pursue or we desire to pursue, sometimes selfishly, at the expense of our children. And it seems like all of the warnings that fell on deaf ears for years and years and years, especially coming from the church, are now being heard and reconsidered because of the output of that kind of living and that philosophy of life. What else did you see in there?
I just thought as it kind of kicks off this whole warning, it holds in tension really well the gift and the great blessing that it is to, it doesn't use that word, but the great responsibility that we have as parents and how it's like this greatest call and it's so rewarding, but it's also so hard. And even reading it, like not as a youth worker, not as somebody who interacts with parents, but as a parent myself, I found myself like nodding along as, he even states from a personal perspective right in the forward, being a dad is the toughest and most rewarding job I've ever had. I'm like, yep, every day is so hard, but it's such a gift that like the Lord has entrusted us with these 2 kids in our home. But it doesn't mean that it's not hard. And just to like see that somewhere was I don't know. I assume for many parents, like, oh yeah, somebody else is vocalizing and putting to paper how I feel. So I think that sets a good tone for the start of the warning as a whole. And then it was interesting to me, there's kind of one thing that's not bolded, but it's larger, it's written in
Yep.
red, and it was that raising children is sacred work. It should matter to all of us. And there's a lot throughout this as a whole that does tie into our walk as Christians and within a faith community. It doesn't specifically say it, but there are so many times that like you could highlight and underline, like, yep, this is talking about the church without talking about the church. And so just that word sacred was used. And in this instance, it really does seem, because then at the last paragraph in the foreword, he says it again, raising children is sacred work. It should matter to all of us. The health and well-being of those who are caring for our children should matter to us as well. So that word sacred is being used in a different sense, but for us as Christians, I think we can read this in a different light of like, yeah, it's a sacred work and a sacred calling that the Lord has placed on our lives.
It's interesting you bring that up, Carrie, about, and I have it circled as well, raising children is sacred work. It should matter to all of us. I mean, just the choice of his, wording there, sacred. And so on one hand, when you read this, you're like, oh man, this is not good. We have to have an advisory. But on the other hand, when you read this, in so many ways, at least for me here at CPYU, go, boy, this is stuff we have been warning parents about for so long. And now it seems like, maybe it's going to be acceptable for everyone to realize this, to have our eyes open, which I think creates tremendous opportunities for those of us in the church, which we'll get to here shortly. Was there anything you wanted to add, Katie?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with what everybody has said. I think part of what I appreciated about the forward was where he talked about how we need to, and Walt, you were just kind of touching on this, we need to rethink the cultural norms around parenting and shifting how we value parenting. He says kind of towards the end, the work of raising a child is work, no less valuable than the work performed in a paid job and of extraordinary value when it comes to the impact on the future of society. Additionally, while parents and caregivers bear the primary responsibility for raising children, society as a whole must see itself as sharing in this responsibility. And again, I know we're probably going to get into this, but that's how we view it in the church. Yes, the parents are the primary disciplers of their children, but the church as a whole, the community in which we are raising our children, also bear that same responsibility. So I think it's just helpful for parents to understand that the work they do inside the home is no less valuable than the work they do outside the home. Yeah. If anything, it's more valuable. Yeah. Yes, we need to earn a living. Yes, we need to, pay our bills and all those things. But when it comes to long-term impact, the value for our family, our society as a whole, of raising children surpasses anything else.
Yeah.
So I just thought it was really cool that, he's talking about a whole shift in how we view parenting.
Yeah, and the good news is, again, when it gets so bad that those who are, in the wider, broader culture recognize it and say, as you said, Katie, we've devalued parenting. And we've seen that for years, right? Now we're having a call to value parenting, and the question is going to be that people are asking, okay, what do I do? What do I do? How do I value my parenting? What are some ways that I can be fed into that and equipped to do that? So we're going to have that conversation. One more thing I just want to mention, up a little bit further from that, he says, I found guilt and shame have become pervasive, often leading parents to hide their struggles, which perpetuates a vicious cycle where stress leads to guilt, which leads to more stress. And I'm just going to say this. I think the church is a place where we can come clean, where we can open ourselves up. If the church is functioning properly, we can be vulnerable about the difficulties that we're having. And as youth workers, when parents come to us, or as churches, when parents come to us and we see and hear that vulnerability, there are many, many things that we can do to resource them and help them. And certainly all of that is built on the foundation of the gospel of a God who loves us and cares for us, and a Savior who has promised to carry our burdens. So we're going to take a break. We're going to come back. We're going to look more deeply into this and start to talk about some of the practical things we can do. Stick with us. Judson College believes that there is no greater task to call students to than devoting their lives to Christ and His mission in the world. That's why they equip students to give their lives for the cause of Christ in the church, among the nations, and in every aspect of society, and why they offer a world-class confessional Christian education at an affordable rate in a vibrant community. At Judson College, your student doesn't have to choose between their Christian convictions and a quality education. With biblical and professional training for a variety of careers and ministries, Judson College can be a trusted next step in your student's education. Visit judsoncollege.com to learn more or to plan a visit. So as we talk about stress and parental stress, I want to just pause here for a minute and bring something up that we talk about when we talk about anxiety and handling anxiety. Anybody who's read The Coddling of the American Mind or The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt may have heard something similar to this, but it's about the fact that all stress is not bad. So when you look at types and degrees of stress, if we would simplify it down on a spectrum from left to right of three kinds, we would talk about positive stress, we would talk about tolerable stress, and then we would talk about toxic stress. So what are they? And this is where I think, and somebody said something in the first segment about, I think it was you, Tim, about traumatizing. All kids get traumatized by their parents. I think we've overdefined trauma. I think there's obviously legitimate trauma that people go through, but we ascribe or we put the label trauma on things that are actually not traumatic but are just normal stresses and strains of life. So keep this in mind. I think we need to see that some stress is good. So positive stress is when you're challenged and pushed mildly out of your comfort zone, which leads to growth and development. So for a kid, let's say, they could be taking a difficult test or forming a new relationship with a safe, unfamiliar person. That's positive stress. Tolerable stress is when bad stuff happens, but it happens in the presence of a buffering, supportive relationship like the one a child has with a parent. And, I'm thinking about this right now in terms of my family of origin, because we've got my mom dealing with some physical issues, and she's in the hospital, and we're really working together to manage what has become stressful for all of us. And while sometimes you feel you're on the brink with certain things, it's tolerable, and we have that support there. And then toxic stress, that third kind, is very severe in its strength, chronic in its duration, it's long-lasting, and it happens without a buffering relationship of care, concern, love, and support. This is the kind of stress that, for our kids, can damage development. This might be what we would, I think, more accurately refer to as trauma. And actually, the way God's made us, we are integrated beings. It's magnificent the way God's made us. But the problem is when there's trouble, that trouble can affect everything about us, even biochemically. And there's research out that, genetically that does this as well. And you can actually pass this on from generation to generation. So being lonely, being isolated from caring adults or caring people increases the likelihood of this. And I think that last part right there, being lonely and isolated from others who are caring, that's certainly part of the report. And I want to go through now. Let's just talk through. They provide a snapshot of parental stressors and some of these that are heightened. So let me go through. I'll tell you what. I'll mention it. And if you have any comments on maybe how you see this being worked out, help those of us who are listening from your perspective as a youth pastor our youth worker. Help us, and Tim, a school counselor, help us understand maybe how this works itself out, or how you see this. If we can stand back from ourselves and say, oh, okay, I didn't notice that. Yeah, I've got that. That's adding to my stress. So let me go through these rather quickly. The first one that's listed is time demands, that there's never enough time. Time has increased for our work. There's other things that we're involved in. How do you see that work itself out? And even if you've had a conversation with a parent without divulging, names and specifics, have you had the opportunity to help them reevaluate how they spend their time? Or maybe you're really wishing you had that conversation, and what would you say to those parents? So time demands.
I actually see this played out in two different ways. One of them is actually mentioned at the end of time demands. And I see parents that don't have, and I know this gets talked about a little bit later too, but parents that are in this like sandwich generation, and I'm one of them too. So it's like we're caring for younger kids while also caring for our parents. And so that is happening. And that's what's mentioned kind of at the end. So it feels like your time is just spread thin among these like two different generations that you're caring for. But the other way that I see this lived out is, and again, like I said, I know we'll talk about this, or I assume we'll talk about it later, is that there's an increase in expectation for what parents are supposed to give in each thing that their kid is signed up for. But there's less community around them to help with that. So just to give an example, I have a couple families that like the parents' desire is to like help coach, their kids' teams and to help in their kids' classrooms. And then to also at the same time get another kid to a different sport, but they are a single parent. And so they can't physically be in two places at once to get kids to coach one team and get a kid to another practice at the same time, or like they just don't have a community around them of like parents and neighbors or things like that, where people aren't like necessarily relying on their community to be like, hey, can you pick up my kid as well and bring them to this team so that I can coach here. So I think I see it lived out in two different ways among our families primarily.
Yeah, so there's a practical takeaway there for the church, and that would be, how do we support these people? And Carrie, I really appreciate that you mentioned single parents, because we really need to step up to help them manage the reality. We can't just, scoff at them. Yeah, you got yourself in this situation. Try to work, now it's your responsibility to work yourself out of this. No, we need to step in, and there's many, many things we can do. And that's where I would say, as youth workers, we need to be really tuned in to those families and make the larger church aware, not only that this is a situation, but there are ways that we can surround them and help them. And this is where intergenerational ministry is so wonderful, when we all worship together and we eat together and that sort of thing. So that's good. The other thing that you mentioned there is, all this involvement and stuff. And I go back to, I think it was in the forward to this, to the introduction to what the Surgeon General wrote, the whole idea of comparison. This is so ramped up right now where you're not, as parents, can we make a shift from comparing ourselves to every other parent in our community that we see on the sidelines, we see at the back to school night, that we see on social media, posting the wonderful, wonderful moments that don't really capture the reality of what's happening there in the home, and we all know that's the case, right? Can we shift from comparing ourselves to others to really living, and this sounds so cliche, but living faithfully in the eyes of God, the audience of one, to really, aspire to be pleasing to God and not look side to side, but run that race with our eyes focused on Jesus, as we're told in the Scriptures. So, yeah, let me move on to the next one for the sake of time. I know Probably every time demands, right? So children's health, that's the number 2 thing. Mental health struggles of children can have a profound impact on parents. Nearly 3 in 4 parents are extremely or somewhat worried that their child will struggle with anxiety or depression. And we recognize, too, that there are special health care needs that are certainly legitimate. You know, I going up to visit my mom, I see the Hershey Medical Center, the Children's Hospital. I was outside the other day just looking up at this 8 or 9-story thing, and I saw little faces in the windows just looking out at this beautiful day when we were outside. God bless those kids, and I think about the parents who struggle with that. But how have you seen that work out, concerns about our child's health?
Yeah, I think I don't know that the internet has helped in this area as much as maybe we think. I think that, like, it's good to be informed, but I find my wife is an adolescent psychiatric nurse, and I glean a lot from her. I think so specifically with anxiety and depression. She was just telling me last night. She read a study recently that indicated that an increase of anxiety and depression in kids' lives, there's a direct correlation to that and a lack of authoritative parenting in their lives, similar to what was written in Bad Therapy. And I think what I'm seeing in parents is a fear of messing our kids up, so we've lost the ability, or losing or give away the ability to say no to things that we need to say no to for momentary pain, for long-term gain, as far as even relationally with our kids. But I think we're bombarded right now with all the things that we need to be afraid of, all the foods that we need to be afraid of, all the things online, all the, and even like it's an interesting, you talk sports, and it's, what I'm noticing is it's younger and younger and younger that kids are having to specialize in a sport. That they say, we want you to be multi-sport athletes. Just play this sport for 5 days a week and find another one to join too, kind of thing. And so I think there seems to be, anyways, just this the fear driven. And again, I'm not saying that we don't need to be aware of certain things. Let's try to put good food in our kids' bodies. Let's try to, do certain things that we can take responsibility for. But there are things that I think we can do as parents where, we get to provide them that security, even though they might be mad at us in the moment, to say, hey, no, we're not going to let you do this, or we're not going to give this to you quite yet, or we're going to withhold this, or we're going to, we'd like you to do this instead with your time, and build these relationships instead. And church is going to be a priority, and whatever, it might be, that can actually contribute to seeing them healthier, even though maybe culture doesn't necessarily communicate that to us.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Anybody want to add anything else on that? All right, let me go on to the next one. And there's 4 more here. Children's safety, concerns about our child safety. So they list things like, being bullied. By the way, I'm going to say something about that very quickly. When I talk to school administrators, when parents complain about bullying, some school administrators I know have had to sit them down and say, look, this is normal childhood, just not getting along. Bullying is something more intense, something different, something more prolonged. And so even having to define that for parents and diffuse, or at least attempt to diffuse, concerns about that. And I'm going to guess that youth workers hear these things as well, coming back from a retreat or after a youth ministry meeting, much like when a kid goes to school and something happens. So bullied, kidnapped, or abducted. Certainly, we're much more aware of sexual trafficking now and some of that, so that puts us on a high alert. Getting beaten up or attacked, or having problems with drugs or alcohol, firearm-related injury, those types of things. And it's interesting to me that when you read Jonathan Haidt, and I think he makes a compelling case based on data, it's actually safer now than it was when, let's say, I was growing up through my childhood and my adolescent years, which, if you listen to the news, it doesn't seem that way, but maybe it's just this, maybe it's the constant influx of bad news, and then once we look at bad news, the algorithms, that take us further and further into bad news, confirming what our suspicions and our fears are. But do you as youth workers, have you encountered this, or I'm sure you've had to take measures to obviously ensure safety in a litigious society, but do you find this over concern maybe, or what Jonathan I call safetyism?
Well, I think at the school in particular, we, when, so when we've had experiences with not very few, but some parents, if they throw out the phrase, "We don't feel that place is safe for our kids" for whatever reason, it is like kind of a trump card, right? Like, what do you say to that? Like, we've created an environment where your child doesn't feel safe, and I think, in lots of those circumstances are, generally speaking, kids being kids, conflict on the playground, that sort of thing, and because their kid has come home and is distraught, they don't feel safe. But so I think I would agree, and then so speaking as a parent, I definitely have increased. I don't know. We have to do a lot of releasing in our house. Like, okay, they want to ride to the store to get a Slurpee on their own. My daughter's a teenager. Like, I was doing that at 9 and 10. So kind of letting that go
without your parents knowing. Sometimes, that was me.
Oh yeah, totally.
Hitchhiking at 12 or 13 years old. Yeah.
Where'd you get that chocolate bar from? But I think we are told over and over and over again how dangerous things are, and I understand we want to be wise in the decisions we make and what we give our kids, but I think it starts to hinge upon, and it is walking that fine line of like, yeah, but is God sovereign and good and going to care for my kids and love my kids more than I do, or do I need to live in fear and make sure my kid is safe all the time?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Anybody else? This is that whole thing, and we've talked about this before about safetyism, which was that term. I don't know if Jonathan Haidt coined that term or not, but a lot of talk now about free play, that our kids need to be allowed to play. Let them go outside and play. That's what builds resilience, right? Putting them in difficult situations, letting them settle the playground conflicts, and even if there's fists that are thrown at some point in time. And I think this is one of the problems with mental health right now. Our kids have not gotten healthy because they've been so locked away in a bubble that they haven't been able to build that kind of resiliency. Okay, so the next one. This is one I really think that, the church can just answer this, but parental isolation and loneliness. 65% of parents and guardians and 77% of single parents in particular experienced loneliness. Thoughts on that and how you've seen that?
I think I've probably shared this here before, but this one I saw played out, and this was a long time ago. This was probably 11 or 12 years ago. At our church, I used to host, while the students were in confirmation, I would have like a parent time with the parents of the students. And I remember so clearly one night that parents were sitting there, and a parent was sharing something about like a very normal teenage thing that their kid was doing. I don't remember what it was at this point. And another mom from across the table was like, "Your kid does that too?" And they were just shocked. This conversation ensued, and I wish I could remember what it was, because it was so, like, it was just such a typical normal teenage behavior. And I think they were both living that in isolation, or feeling like, I'm the only one struggling with this. As a parent, I'm the only one that's dealing with this, and having that parent across the table vocalize how they were feeling and vocalize what was happening in their home, and being able to relate to that instantly took away that feeling of isolation and loneliness. So, and I got to have like a front row seat to watch that play out within the church, which I just thought was beautiful to see played out just in front of what we were doing. So I absolutely think that this is the case. And sometimes it just leaves parents feeling like, well, I can't talk about this anywhere because I'm the only one struggling with it and nobody will get it.
Right. Shame. And
Yeah.
And the comparison that takes place on social media really feeds that. Yeah. Hey, let me keep moving here for the sake of time, because I want to get through this to get to some practical things. I'll mention 2 more. All right. There were 2 more on the list. Technology and social media. I don't know that we really need to go into this. A couple of you mentioned this just as your own concerns. I would share this as well. How do we manage screen time? Nearly 70% of parents say parenting is now more difficult than it was 20 years ago, with children's use of technology and social media as the top 2 cited reasons. And people are concerned. And I'm telling you, there is a ton of data coming out now regarding the negative fallout of technology use, that so many people were in denial. Oh, it's not addictive. Oh, it's not, going to suck my kids in. Oh, it's, not going to lead my kids to, believing lies and things like that. And, those who were prophetic, I would say, the media critics who were writing, like Marshall McLuhan, I quote him all the time, years ago, or Neil Postman. McLuhan said, first we shape our tools and then our tools shape us. And you don't know how your tools are shaping you till they've shaped you or misshaped you or formed you or deformed you. So, yeah, that's a big thing. And then lastly, this is the last thing I'll share right before we take another break, but cultural pressures and our children's future, societal expectations, norms, and pressures to meet perceived parenting standards can contribute to stress as well. And that's where I want to leave it before we take the break and then come back. And I want to talk about, now, how can we answer this? Because what's beautiful about this report is that it doesn't just say, hey, this is how bad it is. There are some suggestions that are made, which when I read these suggestions, I thought, oh, my word, these are so many things that we can take action on in our churches and in our youth groups. And even if we're not parents ourselves as youth workers, we have the ability to connect the dots between parents who are stressed and the kinds of things that will help them gain a biblical perspective on stress, and then develop practices and habits that will foster, the elimination of this, or at least the turning down of the volume. Obviously, we live in a broken and a sinful world, so we're always going to struggle with these things at some level. But how can we begin to diffuse this, and what beautiful opportunities we have as youth workers? So stay with us. We'll be right back and continue our conversation about the Surgeon General's report on parents and mental health and stress. We're excited to announce and invite all of our youth worker friends to join us for the 3rd Annual Northeast Youth Ministry Summit, to be held March 17 to 20 of 2025 in Ligonier, Pennsylvania. This is a lively gathering of rookie youth workers, seasoned youth ministry veterans, paid and volunteer, who come together to be equipped for ministry while connecting in rich community in the beautiful Laurel Highlands of Pennsylvania. While held in the Northeast, the summit is open to everyone. Last year, youth workers ranging in age from 19 to 77 came from 21 different states and 3 countries. This year's theme is Changing World, Unchanging Word. You will receive top-notch training from seasoned youth ministry trainers and experts on how to teach the Bible, how to understand and respond biblically to cultural influences, and how to practically and effectively minister in a world full of emerging challenges and choices. To learn more, see the speakers, browse the full schedule, and to register, visit nymsummit.org. That's nymsummit.org. I hope to see you at the Northeast Youth Ministry Summit in March. Hey, before we continue on, I just want to give a shout out to our sponsor for this episode of Youth Culture Matters, Judson College. I know you heard us talk about Judson College earlier, and we want to encourage you, if you want to learn more about Judson College or to plan a visit, visit judsoncollege.com. judsoncollege.com. Visit them online there, and you can learn more and set up a time to actually physically visit the school. So thanks to Judson College. Now, Chris reminded me during the break that I actually forgot one of these categories of parental stressors that can impact mental health and well-being. It was the first one: financial strain, economic instability, and poverty. And we do not want to overlook that, because across the full spectrum, I think, of those who have and don't have, there just seems to be stress of different kinds, obviously. But I would just make a suggestion here now to be tuned into that. We just had a situation come up in our community that we learned about through our son, where someone that he graduated from high school with has some financial needs, and so we were able to spread the word, and several folks are chipping in and being able to help. They have children, and so there's a lot of concern about the basic needs of the children just at the level of food. And I see many times on our local Facebook page here, parents speaking out saying, hey, we're out of food. Is it legit? Is it not legit? I don't know, but the legitimate concerns are there, and there are people who have deep needs. So youth workers, keep an eye on that. Parents, keep an eye on that. And I know in our church, we have many who are haves and we have many who are have-nots. And it's been beautiful to see the haves quietly and without trumpeting it, caring for the have-nots in some extremely significant ways, everything from housing to food to education. And so keep that in mind. All right, let's talk in our last little segment here about some things that we can begin to do. There's actually a chapter in here. And when I say chapter, this thing's not a book, but a few pages under the heading number 4 that says, we can take action. It needs to be a priority. So let me go through this, and let's talk through some of the recommendations. I'm trying to get my pages, which are horribly out of order here, organized, and look at what some of these things are. All right, so the first one, and I'd be curious as to what you folks have done to communicate on this. We do this here at CPYU, so I'll mention some resources. First, it's time to value and respect time spent parenting on par with time spent working at a paying job, recognizing the critical importance to society of raising children. And I'm curious, we put some wonderful parenting books that communicate clearly that in the scriptures, Christian parenting is a high privilege and a high calling. So we work to get those in the hands of parents, and even perhaps start some small groups in your church. So there are other things you have done in your church, whether it's through your youth ministry or perhaps in the preaching on a Sunday morning or the children's ministry, to create that kind of sense that this is high calling and high privilege. Maybe some ideas you can share, if you have any.
One of the things that we started was like a little play group for our younger families. And we even have a couple homeschool families as well, just to provide an opportunity for moms and caregivers to come together and just do life together. We were talking earlier about the importance of just having a place to share what you're struggling with, what you're going through, because there's probably another parent who's in that same boat. So this provides a space for that, but also provides a space for us to talk about different ways we can disciple our kids in the home. For some of our really young families, that looks pretty basic, but just to be able to bounce ideas off of each other and provide that time and that space while the kids are playing and having snacks and all the things. It's been a really great opportunity for me, not only as somebody on staff, but also as a parent of a young child as well. We just had a meeting yesterday, and just talking through some different things like, oh yeah, my kid did that too, or oh, here's what we're doing to try to encourage this or that. So that's been really helpful.
Yeah, and I like how you say in the context of that, there's this or these opportunities to reframe the narrative on the importance of parenting and the high calling, high privilege. That's the way I like to think about it, just as a reminder. And so, yeah, that's really good. Anybody else, anything before we move on? Well, let's look at the second recommendation here. While parents and caregivers may have the primary responsibility for raising children, they shouldn't have to do it entirely on their own. Thoughts on that? With the church, to me, it's obvious, that we surround and we come alongside and we support and we let them know you're primary, I'm secondary if I'm in youth ministry. But any other thoughts on what you've done to help them with that?
Yeah, I mean, within the context, because we're fortunate enough to be a Christian school, we do we'll run parent nights and try to resource, and a key part of that is actually connection with other parents within the school, continuing to develop that community. But one of the things that I work hard to do is to connect families with local churches within the area. I find this the interesting thing about the warning is they talk about we need to invest more in health and education and safety of children. So they don't, there's not, I guess shouldn't be surprised, but there's not even a suggestion that potentially even like religious organizations could be a part of this, or a faith-based anything would be a part of this. And yet I think, I don't know, there's a lot of, I think, missed opportunities. I love what you said, Walt, about intergenerational. I think there's opportunities for those that are a bit older to serve. And, for us, I look back on our time when I was pastoring in Kelowna and we were away from my family, and we had our 2 kids were both born there. And we had a family in our church, Noel and Crystal, who, all their kids were grown up and they helped raise our kids, and they would last minute babysitting. Arian would go in for work or whatever it might be, and we learned a lot about our parenting style from them as much as we did from our own families and our own upbringings. But having that, and I think we undervalue at times, or maybe I have, but can undervalue that opportunity to, I don't know. I don't think we need to delegate that one to health professionals and educators.
Yeah.
I don't think that that's what needs to happen.
Yeah.
I think we need intentionally look to the church and look to other believers to really be helping us. And sometimes that's can feel intimidating, but I have yet to meet a person, my parents are in their 70s, or people that have grown children that are like, no, I don't want anything to do with this. Leave me alone. I've yet to come across people that when asked for help, they're saying, no chance, get away.
Yeah.
I want to have seashells.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you
Carrie.
brought up I'm just really glad that Tim brought up and I know you did too earlier, the intergenerational integration piece, because I think that that's something that the church does well, or has the opportunity to do well. And just from a practical standpoint, we did like a 4 or 5 week class using one of Rooted's family discipleship courses last year, and we'll do another one early in 2025. And just one of the things that our church did was we encourage parents and grandparents and anyone who cares about the kids in their lives to attend. And then we put people at tables of, 6 or 8, and really encourage people to get into tables of different age brackets and people that you don't normally sit with. And the conversation that happened there amongst parents of, young kids and grown kids and grandparents was just really encouraging. So it's just one, you don't have to ask somebody can you invest the next 20 years into my kid? Encourage parents to sit with each other for 30 minutes and engage and share in that way.
Yeah, I like how you talked about grandparents there. I was thinking about that. Last year, about this time, I was involved with speaking for the Legacy Coalition, which is really about grandparents, and I think Awana's behind that movement. And, grandparents, boy, they play such a big role right now. And that's where I think, even with what we're doing here at CPYU and what you folks, a lot of what you're writing for us, these parent prompts, which we tell, we instruct parents on here's what's happening in the culture, here's what God's word says about it. Here are some discussion questions or some ways to address this. They're not just for parents, they're for grandparents as well. And just to be able to get grandparents clued into what's happening, to raise their awareness, because it's a different world, might just be the motivator to get them to get involved. And when we give them a sense of not only what's happening, but here's how to respond biblically from God's word, that's helpful as well. Let me go to another one here. We need to talk openly about the stress and struggles that come with parenting. We've alluded to that already. I think these small groups are super, super helpful on that. And just to pull back the curtain on the realities for others and just drive home the fact that, look, you're not the only one going through this. Everybody's going through this. And I think we need to directly speak to this culture of comparison, which I would say, especially for moms, it's not just moms, but I think especially for moms that, just gets ramped up because of social media, is a good thing. And if we can get everybody to stop posting these things that fuel this kind of comparison, I think that would be very, very helpful as well. So, culture, then obviously the church, foster a culture of connection among parents to combat loneliness and isolation. Have any of you done I know it's harder to do this now because people are so busy, more so than they were 30, 40 years ago, but like a family retreat? Have you ever done that? I would suggest that. I mean, that is worth the time and investment for everybody, and whether it's a family retreat or like summer, where we do the Northeast Youth Ministry Summit, they do a family camp there at the Ligonier Camp and Conference Center, and I think they do that for a week or two every summer, and entire families come, sometimes with grandparents and extended family as well. So, those are great things. Let me. The last thing I want to do here before we end, just very quickly. I'm gonna read these things and say something just for the sake of time, because this is under the section what communities, community organizations, and schools can do. And like Tim, I'm going, okay, I think the church can do this the best. But let me number one, foster open dialogue about parental stress, mental health, and well-being in culturally appropriate ways. So let's give permission to talk about it, and let's put sources in their hands that help them understand this. So I'm thinking, one of the places we allude to these things and provide, solutions or remedies that are biblical. Well, this is one of the things we do here at CPYU, is the monthly parent page that youth workers subscribe to, where we'll hit on some of the stress and the stress points, and even, some of the confusing aspects of trying to parent through today's world and give them some guidance and direction. And what would be great is if on Sunday mornings in the preaching, these things would be addressed as well. Let's not put it all on the youth pastor here. Equip parents and caregivers with resources to address parental stressors and connect to crucial support services. This is where I would say not just feeding them information on a regular basis that raises their awareness about cultural realities, but have at your fingertips, referrals. Like, you got a parent who comes to you with a kid who's struggling with cutting. This is who I'm going to send you to right away. I'm going to do my homework before it happens, so that when and if it does, and it most likely will, I can point parents and caregivers to those resources. Create opportunities to cultivate supportive social connections among parents and caregivers. That's where, like, a family retreat. Have any of you done, and I'm wondering about this, Tim, even at the school, have any of you done not so much a family retreat, but maybe an evening where you have your normal youth group, but you invite the parents to come as well? Have you guys done that, or have you found success in that, or other events that you've done, even if it's just a social event where they can mix and mingle and develop those social connections? Any ideas or thoughts on that? I've always felt whatever you do in youth group, you with kids, you can do with parents as well, and maybe do that once every couple of months.
Yeah, we actually, within the school context here, but we do a fall retreat with our junior highs each year. And this year was the first year where we actually, typically we'd have one parent and one teacher in the cabins. And this year we actually went all parents in the cabins, and then had parents helping me with the wide games, and parents were it was a ton of fun, got total buy-in. I think, some kids don't love having their parents around, but I think most kids deep down are kind of like, that's my dad, that's my mom, whatever.
Yeah.
And it was a ton of fun.
And by the way, when you start to do that, the kids who don't like having their parents around and whose parents may not be around, will start to bug their parents to be around because everybody else's parents are around. And it's a wonderful, wonderful thing to see that. We saw that in our youth ministry outside of Philadelphia.
One of the things, sorry, can I just
Oh,
add one thing?
yeah.
One of the things we've done, in the church here, is we kind of shifted our programming schedule. Where now one of our main discipleship times is actually Sundays after worship. So what we've done is each week, the kids go to corporate worship, and then we all have lunch together, parents included. And then we break up, we have our different age discipleship groups, and then there's even an adult Bible study that meets during that time as well. So if parents are here, kids need rides, all that kind of thing. There's also an opportunity for the parents as well. We got so much great feedback on doing those lunches. I was really hesitant up front because we're not a very big church. We don't have a ton of families. So it's a lot to ask them to volunteer to bring food to feed everybody. But we had such positive feedback because it gave the parents an opportunity to have just some informal time built into their week where they could connect with each other. They could share different things. They can talk about their weeks. They can do whatever. It allows me an opportunity to get some face-to-face time with them. And the kids can also hang out, which is also really great. So just trying to find ways to build that in, maybe into things you're already doing when parents are always planning to be there, could be helpful because obviously everybody's busy. We have not had a lot of success planning different events. But trying to build in opportunities for fellowship into things we were already doing has been really successful for us.
Yeah, I love that. And you know what? If you do nothing else, Katie, I think what you just suggested there about getting everybody together around food, which we all have to eat, right? And then it just sets up this time for socialization around the tables. That would provide an opportunity to do all these other things. And it's going to build that kind of vulnerable community and supportive community that needs to exist. I think about this. We did this 40 years ago outside of Philadelphia. We did the night we do our youth Bible studies or the choir would practice or whatever. We called it Everybody Together Night. And we would all eat together every week. And then we would divide and conquer with our, unique, I'll use the word programs or things that were going on each week, the youth Bible study, so forth and so on, children's program. And it was wonderful. Lisa and I still talk about it was just such a great time. And now at our church today's Wednesday, she's going to go in this afternoon. She's going to tutor her little 7-year-old Congolese refugee boy that she's been tutoring now for months and months and months. And then she's going to sit with lots and lots of other people. There'll be several hundred people there who will sit at tables. They'll share a meal together and then divide and go to their, respective things. But it's just that community building that, when I read this report, I think one of the biggest things is just isolation. And just human connection is so important, and allowing, our faith and the gospel to be woven in and through that. So big, such a big deal. All right, let's wrap this up. And what would you say in response to what you read? I'm going to give you all a shot to just talk to youth workers here. Maybe say a word to parents as well. I always love to end podcasts with, give me a word to youth workers, give me a word to parents. What would you say to youth workers and parents, the three of you, in response to what we've read in this advisory?
I think I would start by saying to our parents, I just think most of our parents are doing the best that they can. And so I start with some encouragement. Parenting does require a ton of perseverance, but we know that perseverance produces character and character produces hope. Right. So I think I'd start there and then, glean from even just the awareness in this warning, that hopefully you could even take some encouragement going, hey, I'm not alone in this. There's actually a lot of people that struggle with this. And then, and I, for us, it is going to be, we intentionally try to communicate with our parents as much as we can to support and encourage and resource and make sure that they know that if they have questions, that there's someone who's willing to listen, that there can, we can connect them either with the church or even just a conversation. But yeah, I think mostly I'd be saying to parents, hey, like, you're not alone. We see you, you're doing a good job. And ultimately reminding them of the grace of God in all things, that he's just not going to fail. He's not going to fail in all that he is set out to do. And so we can trust him with whatever the future might hold.
Goes along with that, sometimes children's books speak truth to us too. And my 5-year-old has one that she's really enjoying right now. It's by Melissa Kruger, His Grace is Enough. And we read that a lot, to the point where she has the whole thing memorized. So she now says it to me. And it kind of has this refrain throughout that says, His grace is enough. It's so big and so free. His grace is enough, both for you and for me. And that is what I would want just every parent to know. And I would just want, like, every parent to be reminded of regularly, that in those moments of isolation, in those moments of overwhelming stress and anxiety, that God's grace truly is enough.
Childlike faith, and I'm with you, Carrie, on the children's books. Some of the best. Simple truths.
Yep.
Simple, basic truths stated simply over and over and over again. Yeah. Katie, final word?
Yeah, I think obviously encouragement. I know for me as a parent, one of the most comforting things is just to know that I'm not alone. So certainly reminding them that they're not alone. There are other people, parents, grandparents, friends, family, and most importantly, our sovereign Lord, who is walking with us every step of the way, certainly. But I think I would also want to challenge our parents, and I know I'm thinking about this as well, for myself as a parent. I couldn't help but think, as I was reading this article, how many of these issues are the same issues our kids are dealing with. The isolation, the loneliness, stressing about social media and technology and comparison and all of these things. So taking that as an opportunity to have some conversations with our kids, so, obviously if they're old enough, and talk about some ways that you can make some changes maybe in your family, if that's what might be needed. What are some things that might be causing some of the stress for your kids and for you, and how you might change that? As we were talking through that list, I think of how many of those stressors would go away if we would take something off our plate, even if it's a good thing. But if it's causing all these other stresses and issues within the home, well, maybe that's not what's best for us in this season. So having that open dialogue with our spouses, and including our children if they're old enough, and just being very open and honest about, here's where we're struggling, here's where the stresses are, and what might the Lord be trying to teach us in this time, or direct us to do in this time, so that we can eliminate some of those stresses for everybody.
I like this. And just a couple final thoughts before we end, and that would be, and this is on the heels of what you've all said, it's so good. And I think this is most important, that when we understand what life is all about, we're to live our lives under the lordship of Christ, trusting God, to be true to his word, grateful for his grace, grateful for his mercy, grateful for his kindness in our lives. And really, the only way that we're going to begin to understand that and grow in that is if we spend time increasingly in God's word. And as you've all talked about, peeling back on the time takers that tend to stress us out, if we can replace that and see it as absolutely most important to peel back on those things and lean into God's word on a daily basis, it is transformative. In the psychological community, and we've talked about this here before, and I kind of had this thought when I was reading Haidt and Lukianoff's book, Coddling in the American Mind. They talk a lot about cognitive behavioral therapy, which is, you're believing lies that are kind of making you drown. You're drowning in your lies. So you need to realize these are lies, and instead of listening to the lies, tell yourself the truth. And I thought, maybe there's such a thing as cognitive gospel therapy. I practice that, and I need to practice it more, where when I start to believe the lies and the enemy's lies, because the enemy wants to undo us. There's no doubt about that. And one of the first places the enemy goes to undo us is at the level of our family. And so stop believing the enemy's lies and listen to the gospel and read God's word. And I would say to youth workers, fire off truth nuggets all the time. My friends at Reformed Youth Ministries will talk about Scotty Smith. Scotty's a friend of mine as well, so I think you're all familiar with Scotty Smith. And Scotty drops, they said Scotty drops grace bombs. He drops grace bombs. And if it's not every day, it's every other day. I get a text from Scotty. He sends it to me and a couple of my buddies. And it's a grace bomb. It's a truth bomb. And I get it, and I look at it, and I just pause, and I'm going, okay, preach these truths that Scotty's sharing from the scriptures. Preach these truths of the gospel to yourself. And they're reorienting. They're calming. They help me see things that, as they are, that shouldn't be, and reorient me. So youth workers, do that. And families, I want to encourage you to gather for family devotions. I'll just point you to one of the resources we have here, and I know there's resources in a variety of places, but we've put together these family table talk devotionals, and there's over 100 of them. We're adding to them. Use those 15 minutes around the table at night, and just to guide your conversation, make it easier for you to jump into God's word, understand God's word, and begin to apply God's word. So, okay, I'm grateful for this conversation. There's so much more we could talk about. I'm just going to say thank you to our folks who are here. I want to finally, as I look at these faces, I realize we're going to be together at some point here in the near future at the Northeast Youth Ministry Summit. And these folks will be here along with others from our CPYU Research Fellows. I think just about everybody's going to be able to be there, and numerous other youth workers as well. So come and join us and be part of our community. You can look online at cpyu.org or go to nymsummit.org. We've got everything on there in terms of the schedule, the seminar speakers, and how to register, and we'd love to have you join us for that. Thank you, too, for joining us for this episode of Youth Culture Matters, and we'll talk to you on the next episode.
Thanks for joining us for Youth Culture Matters, a podcast from the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding. If you'd like to learn more about today's youth culture, visit our website at cpyu.org. And if you have any questions, comments, or feedback, email us at podcast@cpyu.org.